Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Bratschitsch. I'm very honored to be giving this presentation. I live near Toronto, Canada. And right now it's 7 o'clock in the morning, my time. So I'm going to wish you a good morning, even though it may be evening in where you live. I'm a business consultant involved in many aspects of business, including human resources, management meetings, doing contract bids. And I've been a business consultant for full-time for over 15 years. I'm also what's called a past district governor of Toastmasters International. And that's an organization that's almost 100 years old. There's 16,000 clubs across the world and over 140 countries. And it consists of volunteers in the clubs who help each other, improving their confidence for communication and simply confidence. I'm a member of the Royal Canadian Legion, which is another volunteer group in Canada that is almost, again, 100 years old. And we're volunteers, as I mentioned. And what we do is we look after the needs of our veterans and their families. And once a year, we have Remembrance Day, which was on November 11th, where we remind people nationally about the importance of the values of what our veterans fought for, what they did. In the Royal Canadian Legion, I am the chair of my local branch's youth leadership program, where I deal with students and teachers in schools, talking about values. And it's very interesting in working with the all range of ages of the young students. I used to be a presenter with the Arthritis Society of Canada. I was a workshop facilitator for chronic pain management. Fascinating. Giving presentations to people who are inflicted, with this disease. And it's worldwide, of course, and there's 100 variations of arthritis. And the audience is usually in pain, always in pain with some form of arthritis. I was able to reach out and communicate with those people and try to help them with the program that I was taught. And amongst other things, I used to be a captain of a men-women hockey team for almost 15 years. I retired at the beginning of COVID. I am now 67 years old. I had a lot of years playing against much younger people, who were in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And it was time to hang my skates up, when I was about 65. And probably most importantly, I'm a father of 3 children. They're all adults. And my youngest, who I will briefly talk about later, was born with a severe disability, but that's never affected my mindset. My son, James, has Down syndrome, and now he's 34 years old, and I take care of him every day. And it's a loving pleasure. Now, getting back to my presentation about inner reflective ethics, this will be about how to better deal with the personal dilemmas that we face every day. Some are minor and some are very serious. And the part about this ethics is this is a difficult part of it because sometimes there are no solutions or very difficult solutions. And when we have to go through that, it affects us mentally. So how do we better prepare for it? The presentation will start off with some descriptions of ethics, some of the elements of inner reflective ethics that I'm going to talk about, and about some theoretical examples that appear to be pretty daunting. But these theoretical examples are not merely theory. We know it happens throughout the world every day, and I'll go through that soon. Then I will transition into some real world dilemmas that have happened. Then I'll go into personal examples of mine. You know, we all have our own examples. You do, and I do, of course. And when it comes to talking about our personal examples, it's easier, because it's what we know and what we can live with and how to deal with it. Then towards the end, I will give some advice, not from me, but from the ages. Something that history has done for us. And then how to apply that advice. So in summary, even before I start, this presentation is to consider how to better handle the personal dilemmas, if we can, during our lifetimes, every day. Inner reflective ethics. Inner, of course, within ourselves. Reflective. It's what we're thinking all the time. Do we do this? Do we do that? Could I do that better? It's something we're always turning over in our own minds, our own private thoughts. And ethics. Ethics is a broad term. It has different meanings. But overall, ethics covers morality as well as ethics. Quite often when people talk about ethics, they're talking about morality. But morality is a bit different, but there is overlap, right? I will cover that. Generally, there are three major branches of ethics. There's meta ethics, which is the big picture. What is morality? So they ask, the large general questions. We won't cover that because we generally know what morality is. Then there's normative ethics. And normative is a word that means guidance. It's a common word in law as well as ethics. What we ought to do. So normative ethics tries to guide us, normally what we ought to do in our daily lives. Then there's applied ethics. What should we do every day? And it gets to be very, very detailed. Now, I'm not going to really cover that either, but the part I'm going to cover is reflective ethics, which is a part of applied ethics. Moral principles that govern a person's behavior or actions. But with reflective ethics, it's especially when there are only difficult choices or none at all. Many years ago, I would say about 25 years ago, I heard on the news that there was a bad accident on a highway near Toronto, where I live. A truck driver was driving on the highway, going at a typical highway speed, which is very fast. And there in front of him, he saw at the last moment a car which had 3 teenagers in it, and it was in the lane, but it was stopped. And that driver had to make a quick decision. There was no time to make a choice. He drove right into the bridge instead of continuing on and driving into the car. Now, you know, and I know the chances are that he would have killed those teenagers. But when he drove into the bridge's abutment, he killed himself. And it was a moment of reflection throughout the country, I suppose, but certainly in a local area. People were talking about this driver's ethics, maybe not that word, but his selflessness, how he gave up his life so that he would not kill those teenagers with his truck. And it wasn't his fault, but that didn't matter. You know, if you drive a vehicle, you know that you've come close to accidents yourself, and you probably had your share of accidents, and you don't have much time to think. So the part about the reflective ethics is that he had a difficult dilemma that he did not waste any time to think. And he immediately made his decision by reflex. And perhaps it should be reflex ethics instead of reflective. And made his decision and ended his life based on his beliefs. This is a very extreme example, you know, but it's something I've thought about ever since. Not often, but often enough. Now, more recently, last night in the news, I read that there are a lot of dilemmas for people in my province of Ontario. But what to do if they have COVID and they need to go to work? Because COVID and influenza is starting an upsurge again, you know, where I live. And the hospitals are about 130% capacity. We're getting warnings again that there's going to be a lot of sick people, a lot more sick people. And they're advising, the government's advising us, not mandating, but advising us to take more precautions again. And the news article was about people who have low pay. They got bills to pay, of course, they got families to feed. And they have to go to work. And what if they have COVID? Do they go to work with COVID, with the chance of risking their coworkers and the public? Or do they stay home? But then they need the money to pay their bills. So they're in a dilemma. What do they do? What will, and this has been going on, of course, now and in the past. But now it's going to be of epic proportions again. So what does a person do? And I thought about that again. They need to feed their families, pay their bills, but they go to work. They know they're doing something that's wrong, but you don't have much choice, do they? What would I do? And I'm still thinking about it, and I'm afraid what the answer is, what I would do. I would go to work. And how would I feel? Awful, because I think I'm a good person. I think I have good morals. But then I'd be doing something that's wrong, that's immoral. And how do I deal with that? So this presentation will discuss things like that. Now, there are a lot of books about the 3 major branches of ethics. And they're great authors, famous authors, and you put on seminars, and there's a lot of presentations on YouTube, and they're good. They're really, really good. Whether it's about metaphysics or normative physics, or ethics, and applied ethics, they're all very good. But there's not so much about inner reflective ethics, though. So we have to actually go back in time to the source, because this has always been around. And people have been dealing with this for thousands of years. And there is advice for us that goes back those thousands of years. So this is an ugly part of ethics, because there may not be any answers, or there might be difficult answers about tough choices. There might not be a right way to handle the dilemmas that we face sometimes. Ethics makes us think. Do we know who we are? Do we know ourselves and how to make the best decisions, especially when faced with tough choices? And with inner reflective ethics, what if there appears to be no right way? It's like coming to a fork in the road, and neither direction seems to be good. Inner reflective ethics can be broken down into two segments. There's the ethical dilemmas and moral dilemmas. As I mentioned earlier, they have overlap, but technically they're different. Ethical dilemmas involves external rules that are imposed upon us by government, other organizations, and those rules they'll be different for every organization. But they're rules, and we have to follow those rules. And if we break those rules, we're committing ethical violations. Then there's the moral part. These are personal principles. We can also face dilemmas with moral precepts. Now imagine, let's say you have two contradictory ideas at once. Okay, just like the example I explained about the workers in my province who may have COVID and have to go to work. Those are contradictory ideas, principles. They should stay home, but they have to go to work. Well, that causes mental stress. Now, for some people more than others, but it does. And especially if you and I think that we're good moral people and we have to do something wrong. It gets to us. It bothers us. It causes mental stress. The ethical code does not have to be moral. As I mentioned, it's a set of rules that defines allowable actions. Some examples: corporate best practices and the policies. So the companies that you work for have rules, how you conduct yourself, how you behave. Let's say you're a salesman or a saleswoman, salesperson, and you feel your product's not the best, but your boss says, you got to sell them and you need a paycheck. So you have to follow the rules. You have to do what the company says, although you may have some doubts. Then, of course, there's the laws of our country: speeding, personal conduct. We're encouraged, not to do harmful things to others. Then there's customs, like waiting in line for your turn. being polite to others, like opening doors. There's customs, there's rules people expect us to follow if we're going to live side by side. Then, of course, the moral precepts, which are personal guiding principles about what is right or wrong. And they are generally based on personal beliefs and upbringing. Commonly about, it's from our religious beliefs and from our upbringing. And examples will be keep your promises, always tell the truth, be generous. If you're like me, and there's many more, of course, but if you're like me, just looking at those three, yeah, I'm not perfect. I haven't always kept those moral precepts up to snuff like I should have. I try to keep my promises. I think I do. I always try to tell the truth, but I'd be lying if I told you I always did tell the truth. I sometimes fib. And be generous. There's times I haven't. There's times I have. But they're good guidelines. So those are two of the elements. Now, when we have conflict with our ethics and our morals, we're in a personal state of tension and conflict. It's defined as moral dissonance. It's a discomfort when we have two contradicting ethical ideas at the same time. And I touched base on that already with the COVID workers, and then there's cognitive dissonance, which is what I think we have a lot of. It's conflict between a person's moral self-image and immoral action. And of course, again, I'm going to go back to people working who have to work, who have COVID. So imagine, if we had to do that, and maybe we have. Maybe you've done it. Maybe I've done it. We're trying to do the right thing, but I've done something wrong, and I know it. And that's going to cause tension within myself. I'm going to feel guilty, especially if I find out that someone has suffered from my immoral action. Now, a good example is too common in our society. A longtime bookkeeper steals money from her trusting employer to fund a gambling addiction. It could, her, I said, him, his, theirs, doesn't matter. But again, a longtime bookkeeper stealing money from the employer for something. Now, this is common use. And sometimes when these people, when they get caught, they actually express relief that they're caught, because they've been wrestling with that state of tension and conflict, which is just getting to them. You've probably heard of stories of, people who are treasurers, with sports associations, and they fall into the same trap and they pilfer money. So if it's an association of for football for young children, and all of a sudden the money's gone, and the person's caught, and often they are relieved that they're finally caught. Not always. There's some people that will keep on doing it, but people, they fall into traps and you can't get out of it, and it really stresses them and makes them sick. Obviously, not everyone is the same, and not every situation is the same. So this presentation is not about judging other people. It's about how we can help ourselves handle personal dilemmas that will cause conflict within ourselves if they're not handled right. And if we have to make tough choices, how can we improve upon upon that. And frankly, that happens all the time. So it's something that is not often discussed, but this is what I'm trying to do today. Simple examples, theoretical, but this goes on every day in the world. A man is hungry and he steals bread to eat. Well, that's unethical. Yeah. And he's taking someone else's property. Perhaps a baker needs to sell that bread to make revenue to feed his or her family. But the man's hungry. He needs to eat. So he's done something unethical and immoral, no doubt. The question for our society and for ourselves is, what's the extent of the immorality? And what can we do about it? But it's there. Next example. A woman steals bread to feed her child. And this is an awful dilemma. But it happens. Now it could be a father, a mother, to feed the child. Yes, it's immoral. Yes, it's unethical. And our hearts break. And maybe we've had to have done it. I know 30 years ago, my business partner was dying and business was, teeter-tottering. And I had a tough time. I had temptations. Fortunately, I had help, but the temptations were there. Would I have stolen bread to feed my children? Yes, I would have. I even feel guilty thinking about it now, but I feel worse about the people that have to do it every day or something like that. Now, the long-term solution would be for society to deal with it, but people need to eat every day. And the third example is someone steals bread or something else to sell to someone else. And theft is a common problem. It's unethical because it breaks the rules of society. It's immoral because it takes something from somebody. And that's an easy answer there, right? It is immoral, it is unethical, and it should be punished. So that's a simple one, but we're not dealing with simple issues here. I will now go into political examples, and I'm not trying to pick on any one particular country, but if you're familiar with what goes on in North America, this will resonate. So I pose the situation. If the leader of a nation claims that they lost in a fraudulent election, why should the citizens accept the results? So let's say a president of a country claims that the election was stolen. Why shouldn't people believe him? Why should the citizens accept the results? Because he's the leader. I mean, he's the one that's supposed to enforce the rules, not challenge them. So why would the citizens bother to vote in the future? So that's a theoretical question. But where does that lead the political system if people cannot trust the electoral process? And if you were to think about it, what is it to the laws of our countries? Every country has laws. It's the fact that our leaders believe in the laws and they enforce it. So therefore, we should as well. But the dilemma here is that the leaders are challenging the very system that got them elected. And of course, if you're following the news, that at least one or two countries are trying to work out that dilemma right now. An example in literature. Now, when I went to school, I studied Shakespeare, the famous British playwright. And I'm not sure if you've heard of Shakespeare. He wrote, of course, many classics. The one I'm going to refer to is Hamlet. And Shakespeare wrote this play around the year 1600. And he deliberately explored the personal dilemmas where there are only bad choices. There's no good choices. And the lead character, Hamlet, he was the son of a king of Denmark who died, was killed. And Hamlet was torn between living a terrible life that he could just not bear doing every day, or committing suicide when he greatly feared death. And if you heard the phrase, this applies: to be or not to be. That is the question. So there was no answer given in this play. Then there's a classic legal dilemma that actually is a fictional case. It was written in 1949 by a natural law lawyer. And by natural law, I refer to law that is based on morals, which actually was the method for centuries, in Europe and, of course, more recently in North America, but, throughout the world right now, because morals and religion are intertwined. And the man who wrote this, his name is Lon, L-O-N-L, middle initial, Fuller. And he wrote a story about the case of the Spelunkian explorers. And I'm sure I got that word wrong, Spelunkian. Now, those are people who go and explore caves. So Mr. Fuller wrote this story. It was actually a book about these 5 friends who went exploring in caves. And there was a landslide, and they were trapped in the cave. And they had a radio where the power was dying. And they realized that they were not going to be rescued in time. They were going to starve to death. And they waited until they were in really bad shape. They decided that one of them would be killed and eaten. It's a drastic choice, right? Die or be a cannibal. Kill one of your friends and eat them. So they're starving. And they do kill one of them. And afterwards, when they are rescued, of course, when they kill them, they ate them. So when they are finally rescued, they're alive and they recover and they're tried for murder. And that is where the real interesting part of the story is, especially if you like watching TV, these kind of things. And there was 5 possible outcomes written and explored in this book. 5. There really wasn't one that was favored. So it's 5 different options, paths to think about. So that's a dilemma with 5 choices. And of course, they're all going to go to jail, prison. But for how long, or are they going to be hung? So this is, law does not always have answers for these type of things as well. And this case, this fictional case, is taught to law students. We'll now get into some personal examples, which of course, I know like the back of my hand because I've lived through them, just like you are living through your personal dilemmas. As a business consultant, I've come across many tough dilemmas. And one example that really comes to mind is a very sad story on all accounts. We're no winners. We're all losers in this. An experienced, valuable salesman was caught doctoring his expenses and his medical claims. And it was to a large degree for a long time. And this became known throughout the company. And our industry is a very precise industry. It's tough to train people. It's also very competitive. We need good, experienced salespeople. And this fellow was very, very good. So he made great contributions to the company's revenues and profits. But he did things that were very unethical and very immoral. And only there was a way to get around it. But there wasn't. Really, there wasn't. Perhaps, if no one else knew about it, of course, it's not a good call, is it? Well, maybe we could have kept it, but that's the wrong call, right? We're sacrificing our morals and ethics if we do that. So just because other people knew, we had no choice, and I feel like that's kind of being weak on our part, but that was the overriding factor. Should not have been. It should have been that we had to act morally and ethically, but nevertheless, we had to terminate this person's employment. And we suffered for it, and so did he. Tough call. But again, there is a demand for corporate accountability and ethics and morals. You hear about that a lot, involving the environment, and that is a very big issue in where I live, but also in the way we conduct ourselves. This is, if I could indulge you, one of my favorite stories. It's something that has really tested how I handle moral and ethical dilemmas with friends, people who I played sports with. And of course, being in Canada, a lot of us play hockey, ice hockey, and field hockey, but ice hockey. And of course, it's not restricted to gender. Women play hockey. And it's always amused me, how men in Canada are shocked when they see women playing really good hockey. And I can't get over that, but it happens all the time. I've been I was a member of my hockey team for 15 years. And my team made me captain at the very beginning. And I never wanted to be captain. I never wore, captains in hockey, they like to put the letter C on their jersey to show that they're captain, But I never put the C on my jersey. And I figured if they don't know I'm the captain, that's fine with me. I'd rather lead by example. I don't need a letter on my jersey. Nevertheless, tested many, many times. And I made some immoral decisions. And I'd like to discuss that with you right now. Typically, in our league, each team has 16 players at the most. And we should have 16 players. At the beginning of the season, when the teams, are getting new players to replace those who retired, there's a lot of chaos. The league sometimes sends too many players to one team and not enough to the other team. And I usually found myself in that situation where at the beginning of the season, sitting in a room, putting the equipment on, there's too many players. And I have to think, well, I'm going to have to give some people some bad news. I'm going to have to transfer people off my team. And about 12 years ago, such happened. And I looked in my room and I saw we had 20 men in our room. And we all know there's too many players. And we're all wondering, how are we going to get enough action on the ice? Because we can't all play at the same time. We can have 5 skaters and 1 goaltender. The goaltender is always on the ice. So we have a rotation of 5 skaters. We all know that this is, we're all going to suffer from a lack of playing time. If the playing time is distributed fairly, which I always did. There was a knock on the door. The door opened, and a woman partially stepped in. Partially, because after all, it is a men's change room. But she saw that we were, just about finished putting our hockey equipment on. She had her hockey equipment on. She had a white hockey jersey. It was all white with some trim. I will not forget that scene. And she looked around the room. And she saw that we had a lot of players. And she said, I'm looking for a team to play on. I'm supposed to play on the white team, she said. But they looked at me and told me they had enough players. I knew for a fact the white team only had 10 players, not 60. So when they looked at her, they obviously saw she was a woman. And they immediately turned her away. And she knew it. I mean, this person knew it. I mean, a psychiatric nurse. I mean, she knows things. She knows how to read people, how to read a room. I did something wrong, immoral, and, by the way, we always do things unethical. I said, welcome to our team. You will play with us, so I told her. And there was a reaction in the room. There was, players in the corners making, negative comments under their breath. I could hear it. I'm always attuned to that. They knew I did something wrong. They knew I did something wrong. And this woman did play in our team and stayed on our team for 12 years. But that night, after that game, I transferred I transferred 5 players. I was going to transfer 4 players to the white team, but it's 5 because now this woman has come on board. And the 5 people I transferred, they should have, they should have been upset, and they were upset. And one of them was a fellow named Dave. Good guy. They're all good people. And Dave stayed in the league a long time, and he played on the other teams. And when we would see each other, we were polite, but Dave knew that I did something wrong. And I suffered from that dilemma. I had dissonance, a great discomfort. And I did it reflexively because of my inner reflections that I had to do something here. I had to do what I thought maybe not was right, but what was the best of two decisions. It turned out to be a wonderful thing that I did, because our team became known as a fair team, kind, considerate, and we had other women join our team. And there's a photograph of our team. We won the championship one year, And in the picture are four women. It didn't matter to me. I mean, they're fantastic hockey players. So, you just don't discriminate. I mean, you shouldn't discriminate, but we know there's discrimination. We were the only men-women team in the league, and we won that championship. We deserve to win that championship. And some people tell me that moment was one of the best moments of their lives. I had to wrestle with the dissonance for many, many years. I made similar choices like that. We had a fellow once that walked into the room a couple of years later. And again, we had too many players. And this is a man, not a woman. And I thought, this is the kind of fellow that we want on our team. So I transferred someone else off, someone who had tenure, seniority, to this new fellow. And I did it again. And actually, I did it again and again and again. Yes, I had a dilemma. And I have to trust myself to make the best possible choice, even though it's wrong. Now, my team knew what I was doing. Everyone is smart, right? We're all smart. I'm not any smarter than you. I'm probably older than you, and maybe you're smarter than me, and that's okay. But we're all smart. And what really helps is that when our friends and family and others accept our values, they know what we're going through. And that happened to me with this team of beautiful people. One day at a social event, they presented me with this framed photograph with their signatures on it. Now, to me, what that meant, the way I decided to look at it, was they accepted me for what I did as team captain, as a human being, as a decision maker, as a person who wrestled with morals and ethics. And what a gift. What a gift. So in times when I, sometimes will doubt myself, like we all do, I'll look at that picture and say, people believe in my values, and they believe in me for having my values. Now, this story has a final part to it. I mentioned the woman that stepped into the room who was welcomed to the team. And then I mentioned about the man who came into the room a couple of years later and was also welcomed to the team. In both cases, other people were displaced. Well, that woman and that man became friends, like we all did. They fell in love and they got married. So what a conclusion to a great story. And actually, it's not a conclusion. It's a great marriage. To me, now I'm retired, it's a great friendship. Just imagine how fate sort of intervened and also said, you did the right things. You did it. And so that's something that no one can ever take away from me. Just like when you do something similar and you get rewarded somehow, you get rewarded. It's a small step, a step to be embraced. So facing a dilemmas, and making tough choices reflexively from inner reflection, knowing they're tough choices, knowing they're maybe the wrong choices, knowing it's not necessarily the right thing to do. But it's the way that we deal ourselves personally. No one can teach us that. Stuff that we have to do and live through. Advice. I mentioned to you that there's not a lot of books about dealing with these ugly, sometimes difficult situations where there's tough choices. Like who taught that truck driver to make his decision? Who can advise those people who have COVID and need to feed their families? Who has the moral authority? Oh, the law can tell them, yes. But morally, who can tell them? We, ourselves, only ourselves, from inner reflective ethics, can weigh the issues and make the decisions. You know, and quite often, like that truck driver, it has to be done quick. And like when that woman walked into the room, I did it very quick, you know, without even thinking. It was Socrates, the Greek philosopher, and I know he wasn't. He's not the only philosopher. Lots of men and women in all of our cultures and societies, just like him, right? But I know that Socrates, the Greek philosopher, said over 2,600 years ago, 2 words: know thyself. Or, in today's lingo, know yourself. 2 words. I'm not big on quotations. I don't quote Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. I don't, because I don't feel I'm worthy to fill their shoes. That's just me. I just feel that way. And I'm certainly not a Socrates. So those are the 2 words. And I'm giving him credit for it. Know thyself is the philosophy of self-knowledge. And this is something that I've been presenting to you, things you already know. But I'm trying to add some extra thoughts to what you already know. So the philosophy of self-knowledge. So know yourself is the key to better handling personal dilemmas that have difficult choices. So first and foremost, to know one's own character. And honestly, there's times I think, well, maybe, in that meeting, I talked too much or I overtalked people. Or I've made, what might be known as mistakes. But I'm trying to understand my character. 67, and I got a long way to go, a lot of things to do. I don't look at it as mistakes. I'm not afraid to look at my character. I'm not afraid to take advice, because I look at it's how I can learn to do things better. How can I better myself? And I've been thinking that way now for many, many, many years. And I'm more comfortable. I can live with that. I can thrive with that. I can learn from that. So I'm not really afraid to make mistakes, although I'll try not to, because there's guilt associated with the word mistake, but there's almost a prosperity, a joy of self-development when I think about lessons learned of how I could do better. So know thyself is a good thing. One of Socrates' pupils was Aristotle. Aristotle wrote a book on ethics. He had a very good book on ethics, a book that has been feeding our philosophers and thinkers for, at least in my part, for thousands of years. And his book was it's called, and again, I'm going to mispronounce it, the Nicomachean Ethics, but I'm just going to call it ethics. I can handle that. And he wrote many things. And of course, there's one sentence. He wrote the man. And of course, I'm going to say the person, because that's or the woman, the man or woman who possesses character excellence will tend to do the right thing at the right time and in the right way. So where his teacher, his mentor, Socrates, was saying, know thyself, Aristotle took it further and said, do something with it. Okay, develop your character where you're as ethical as you can be, as moral as you can be, and do the right thing at the right time in the right way. Now, I am no philosopher. So and after discussing the inner reflective ethics of tough choices, I might paraphrase a few words and say something like, do the best thing at the right time and in the best way possible at the time, because best may not be right, but it's better or best. Again, that's just to fit the theme of this presentation, but it's also, that's the way I think. And Aristotle said, the purpose of ethics, so the purpose of all I've talked about, is to become good, is to do it, not merely to know. So the personal examples I gave you were my attempts to do that, to be good, not just to know what is good or better, but to do it. Now, how do we become more reflective in order to become good? How does it work? How do we take this and actually apply it? And Aristotle tells us in his words, which were Greek and translated probably a lot of times into English, which is the only language I speak, unfortunately, into what's called a growth mindset. And that is a phrase now in modern ethics, okay, where you believe that your intelligence and talent can be further developed with practice and effort, like Aristotle says. Do it, okay? So with your open mind, you can reflect upon your growth, reflect upon your growth, such as, you tell yourself, I can improve my skills with effort and practice. I appreciate when others give me feedback to help me learn and grow. I know that I can improve. It's not mistakes, but lessons learned. And I celebrate the small steps. And we do this often, every day. Think about the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset. I won't even talk about that because we know what that is, the fixed mindset. The growth mindset, through all our difficult decisions, all the time, and even through the easy decisions, we practice to develop our inner reflective ethics. It's about knowing our own character, implementing a growth mindset, and doing the best thing whenever we can. And notice again, I did not say the right thing, because there may not be the right thing. Hopefully for a better world, but this is inner, this is personal. So I cannot change the world, but I can change my part of the world. And certainly for a better and less stressful and a happier you. So thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope maybe there's one or two things that you've taken away from this that you look at, that you will reflect upon. And although we'll never meet, I absolutely wish you the very best every day, and every difficult dilemma that you encounter. I'm with you all the way spiritually. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.